in your book, you talk about Jesus was baptized in a region believed to be the literal entrance of the underworld. So talk about that.
Yeah, this is something that has been hiding in plain sight. For 2,000 years, Christians have been trying to find the location of the place where Jesus was baptized. And the only geographic clue we really get, specific clue, is in chapter 1 of the Gospel of John, where John is confronted by agents who are sent forth by the Sanhedrin from Jerusalem to find out by what authority he is baptizing, a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. These things happened where John was baptizing at Bethany across the Jordan, or Bethany beyond the Jordan. The only Bethany mentioned in Scripture is the one on the Mount of Olives, which is not beyond or across the Jordan, east of the Jordan.
Nowhere close to it.
Right. So for 2,000 years, this location has eluded people. But in the 19th century, a gentleman who was sent by the Palestine Exploration Fund named Claude Condor, who was a friend, by the way, of
Sir Charles
Warren, who found that very famous inscription on the temple on the summit of Mount Hermon. Condor wrote that Bethany in the original Greek was Bethania, which was a transliteration of the Latin name Botania, which is Bashan across the Jordan. Now that's the region that was King Og of Bashan. That's essentially the Golan Heights today, north and east of the Sea of Galilee. When you look at the clues following that little reference in John 1 verse 28, you see that the first 3 disciples called are from the city of Bethsaida, which is north of the Sea of Galilee. That's Andrew, then Peter, then Philip. All right, now Andrew and Peter, we know from other Gospels, the other synoptic Gospels, were partners in a fishing business with with John and James on the Sea of Galilee. So if Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist, he surely wasn't following him across the river from Jericho, 90 miles away. It was north of the Sea of Galilee in this region called Bashan, which again, in the ancient world, everybody knew was the entrance to the netherworld.
Wow. So he's baptized there. So why are you saying that's the entrance to the underworld? What evidence is there of that?
Well, there are several things. One of them being that many people who follow our work and yours are aware of Gilgal Rephaim, the Wheel of the Giants. It is in Bashan, and it is a series of walls that are circular, one inside the other, nested, and in the very center is a tumulus that is considered an entry to the underworld, in that when you go down into it, and this is according to archaeologists, when you go down into it, you are now in a dark place that is as if you are going into the underworld. There was a belief that if you even dug a hole, it would be a way to commune with the ancestors, who are just the demons. So in Gilgal Rephaim, there is that structure where there's another structure just like it at the site where we believe that the Lord was baptized.
Yes, it's called Khubet Beteha, which in Arabic means ruins of Bethsaida. It's only half a mile from the site of the ancient city that was the hometown of Peter and Andrew and Philip. It's on the bank of the Jordan River, about 2 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And just below this megalithic structure, it's about 1/3 the size of Gilgal Rephaim, but it's very similar, concentric rings of stone around a central tumulus. And the bank slopes down about 75 to 100 feet perhaps, makes a beautiful natural theater where you could get hundreds, thousands of people perhaps sitting on the bank watching somebody ministering down there at the Jordan River. So we believe that's the location of the baptismal site of Jesus. But Bashan as a whole is covered with these megalithic structures called dolmens, which in their very simplest form look like a table. In fact, that's what the word means, dolmen.
Yes.
2 slabs of stone upright with a tabletop across the top. They found something like 5,600 of them on the Golan Heights. There are so many that the Israeli archaeologist who led the survey of the Golan Heights about 10, 15 years ago, wrote that we can no longer use the term dolmen field to describe the collections of these dolmens, because we don't know where one ends and the next one begins. For all intents and purposes, ancient Bashan was a giant necropolis covered with these monuments to the cult of the dead.
And if you follow it northward, you eventually get to the foot of Mount Hermon, where you find what was actually referred to by our Lord as the gates to hell. It's the Grotto of Pan. And it was believed to be bottomless during the 1st century. Now,
wow.
Just because they couldn't lower a rope and find a bottom at that time doesn't mean it didn't have a bottom. They just couldn't find it. But they would leave offerings for the dead, for the ancestors, the demons at that site.
And Jesus specifically walked his disciples from Capernaum, which was the base of his ministry on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, to Caesarea Philippi, where the Grotto of Pan is located. That's a 30-mile hike, about 14 hours in sandals across rough terrain. So
and you couldn't go straight either. You had to go around because there was a big swamp in the middle.
That's right. That valley through which the Jordan River runs today, which is now beautiful farmland, it looks like the American Midwest, back in the day was a big swamp. So they had to cross the hills and go up and down the hills that are part of the Upper Galilee. But he walked them there specifically on a 14-hour hike just so he could make that declaration in front of this cave that everybody knew was the entrance to the netherworld. Who do you say that I am? And blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for this is not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, you are Petros. And on this rock, this Petra, this 9,200-foot mountain, that scholars agree was basically the Canaanite equivalent of Mount Olympus. It's where the gods met. He said, on this rock, I will build my ecclesia, my church, and the gates of hell, this really big cave right over here, will not prevail against it. Jesus did that deliberately.
Well, we were there a few years ago. It's phenomenal. I mean, it's fascinating to see. He specifically went there, and you're looking at the gates of hell. It's sitting right there in front of you. And so, when you're reading the Bible, you don't see that. But, going back to his baptism, and then when he declares his divinity there, he's making a statement. He's going to the place that he wants to make that statement. And the statement, like at his baptism, was, what was the statement?
It was like a declaration of war on these spirits, these demonic spirits that, interestingly, in the Old Testament, you don't see the prophets casting demons out of people who are possessed. You see that David played his lyre to soothe the spirit of Saul that was being tormented by an evil spirit. But when Jesus arrives on the scene, casting out demons was a major part of his ministry and of the apostles. And it was essentially saying, you're on my land. Israel belongs to me. This is my holy ground. Get off my property.
Well, and the book of Enoch, which is extra biblical, but the book of Enoch talks about Mount Hermon was where the 200 fallen angels came down and swore an oath to populate the world with, hybrid race. And so Jesus is going right into the thick of enemy territory, basically claiming that ground back for God, right?
Think about Psalm 23 when it says that he leads his flock, he leads us into the valley of the shadow of death. That's that region, we believe. And when he gets there, he prepares a table. That whole region was filled with structures that we call today dolmens. It means table. They look like tables. And in those tables, in those sites, the communion with these fallen entities would take place, and the human beings who worship them were required to feed them and libation them. They had to give them food and drink. What does the Lord do for us? He prepares a table. He anoints our head with oil, showing that we are part of a royal family, and then he fills our cup to overflowing. One and done. He fills that cup once, showing a fallen realm. He gives himself for us, not the other way around.
I love that. Now, the first chapter in your book, you talk about the origin of demons, because we're talking about casting out demons, and it was a major part of Jesus' ministry and the ministry of the early church. So what is the origin of demons?
Well, it was the understanding of Jews of Jesus' day, the Second Temple period, and of the early church. And again, this is made explicit in the book of 1 Enoch, that demons are the spirits of the Nephilim giants destroyed in the flood of Noah, that their bodies were mortal, but their spirits, being hybrid, neither human nor divine, but some of both, were denied access to the typical place that spirits would go. They were not allowed into heaven, and they were not allowed into Sheol, or at least not permanently there, but condemned to wander the earth, tormenting humanity without judgment, according to 1 Enoch, until the final judgment. Now, there are those who say, well, yeah, but that's not in the Bible, so how do we understand that, why can we trust that 1 Enoch is correct in that? Well, when you look closely at the Hebrew in the Old Testament, there are some clues there that suggest that this was the understanding of the prophets as well. The shades that rise up to greet the divine rebel in Isaiah chapter 14. Halel ben Shachar, translated by Jerome as Lucifer. The shades, that in Hebrew is Rephaim. That was the term given to the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. And in fact, in the Septuagint translation, Rephaim is very often translated as giants. Another clue is in Ezekiel chapter 32, which is a polemic against the king of Egypt, saying that the king of Egypt is going to die. He's going to go down to the pit, where in the midst of Sheol, the mighty chiefs, and in Hebrew that's Gibborim Nophalim. There are some scholars who believe that that word Nophalim, translated chiefs, is actually Nephilim. Mm-hmm. But that's how the Septuagint translators, and these were Jewish religious scholars in the 4th century, 3rd century BC, who translated the Hebrew text into Greek. That's how they understood it. They said the giants in the midst of Sheol. So the spirits of the giants were Rephaim. Clearly, they were in the afterlife. There are other, like Proverbs, where one who wanders from the way of good sense will find himself in the assembly of the dead, but it's the assembly of the Rephaim. So the clues are there in the Old Testament. It's made explicit in the book of 1 Enoch. And when you read the writings of the early church fathers like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus and Athenagoras and Origen, et cetera, until the time of Augustine in the 4th or the 5th century, that was the consensus view. Demons were the spirits of the giants who were the hybrid offspring of the sons of God from Genesis 6 and human women.
And don't you think, honey, that this is why the original interpretation of Genesis 6 was altered so that it became what's known as the Sethite View, which makes no sense whatsoever?
Yeah, logically, it doesn't make any sense. What's interesting, Jimmy, is that biblical scholars, those who study the Bible as though it's literature or an anthropological study, for about the last 100 years, they've agreed, yeah, that's what was meant in Genesis chapter 6, but it's not what pastors are taught in seminary. Mm-hmm. So it's not what we in the pews are hearing. It really opens up a lot of meaning in the Old Testament when we realize, hey, this really is a supernatural war, and God had to go to great lengths to protect the bloodline that would produce the Messiah, and offering himself, as Sharon said, as that sacrifice to sustain us in the afterlife rather than the deception that the demons conned our ancestors into, of having to feed the ancestors to keep them alive in the afterlife.
Well, you document now all of this in your book. You talk about the early church fathers. You have quotes in there about them, and also about the Sethite view, about how the early church changed Genesis 6. And this is something, I became a pastor in 1983, and back then it was absolutely taboo to preach on Genesis 6 from the historical perspective, from the biblical perspective. Oh, it was called the serpent seed doctrine. Mm-hmm. Oh, and if anybody taught it, you were really criticized heavily. Well, the first person that I heard articulate it was Chuck Mister, and absolutely brilliant Bible teacher, and I had so much respect for him. Well, he was just unapologetic. He just said, this is the way it is, whatever. Well, that's when I began to understand this is the correct biblical interpretation of Genesis 6 and everything that's happened after it. Dr. Michael Eisner wrote that book, Reversing Hermon. And like you guys, he's talking about the ministry of Jesus was an assault on what the devil tried to do through the giants and through, all the things that he did beginning at Mount Hermon. All that area you're talking about, it's right there in the Mount Hermon area, and that's where Jesus concentrated his ministry. So the reason that I believe that, because some people believe that the fallen angels, the third of the fallen angels that fell with Satan, those are the demons. Well, in Ephesians 6, we're told we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, forces of darkness, whatever. I believe the fallen angels, that's the rank and order of Satan. I mean, that's a control force in the heavenly realms, the prince of the power of the air. That's there. And we certainly are battling against those forces.
Oh, yeah.
But the reason that I believe it makes so much sense that the demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim is because the angels they never had bodies. They had spirit bodies. They didn't have physical bodies. And Jesus said in Luke, when the spirit leaves a man, he goes into waterless places looking for a dwelling place. And when he doesn't find, this is talking about us, when he doesn't find one, he goes back to his house and takes 7 demons worse, and the last state of the man becomes worse than the first. The demons, if they are the spirits of the Nephilim, they're disembodied. They don't have a place to manifest their nature. And they're looking for a human being that is willing or open to their presence knowingly or unknowingly so they can manifest hate, sickness, uncleanness, all the things that you see that Jesus casting out demons in the Old Testament. So I certainly believe there is a fallen angelic realm in the earth today that we're battling against, Ephesians 6, but they didn't have bodies. They're not necessarily looking for, I don't think, a body, but the Nephilim, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, I think that makes a lot of sense. So you guys talk about the ancient enemy of God may have been the high priest in Eden. Now talk about that.
Oh boy, I tell you what, that is one of those things. And when we first noticed it, a friend of ours noticed it at about the same time and contacted Derek, and we both went, well, there's confirmation.
Yeah. This was something I went into a bit in my previous book, The Second Coming of Saturn. And a friend of ours about 15 years ago wrote a book called Deconstructing Lucifer, where he argued that Lucifer is not Satan. And at the time, I thought,
Time was like,
yeah, David W. Lowe is his name, by the way.
Great.
If you're interested in looking up the book, because it's really well researched. So David, come on, don't be silly. Everybody knows Lucifer is Satan. But when you start looking at Isaiah chapter 14 and comparing it to Satan in the Bible, for one thing, there's no specific connection between Isaiah 14 and Genesis chapter 3. Secondly, Satan, as he's described in the Old Testament, is never connected with the netherworld, whereas Isaiah 14 and the parallel chapter in Ezekiel 28, it's clear that this entity is thrown out to the netherworld. The Rephaim rise up to greet him and say, hey, look, you're as weak as we are. Here's your bed made of worms and maggots are your covers.
Yeah.
But in Ezekiel 28, it also says that you were the signet of perfection. It's a difficult translation in the Hebrew, but every stone was your covering, and it goes through all the precious stones. And again, going back to the Septuagint translation, the translation from Hebrew into Greek in the 3rd century BC, the 12 stones described, not just 9 in the English translations that we have, the 12 stones are the same 12 that are in the ephod, which is the high priest's garment. So if this entity who was thrown out of Eden, he was thrown off the holy mountain of God, because Eden, not just a garden, it's a garden on the mountain of God, was wearing this high priest's covering. So
the thing about the Bible is, you read the Bible, but the more you understand it, the more things happen for a reason. They happen at certain places for a reason. And that's what's so great about your book, is you're helping people to understand what Jesus did was an invasion of enemy territory and taking it back for God and demonstrating his preeminence over the spirit world.